it is going to come down to a dysfunctional system. There isn't any pushback because the anti-whites who call themselves Democrats have defeated the Republicans who are anti-whites who call themselves Republicans. So there isn't going to be any substantial or significant pushback. So it's going to have to be some breakdown. And you're already seeing that in places in the United States, and I dare say in the UK as well, as anti-white, increasingly anti-white ideas and suggestions, laws, codes, etc., are not met with some sort of resistance from healthy people. Remember, the victimization of individuals need not be white positive. Their pushback need not be white positive to undermine what the anti-whites are doing. You might see some sort of breakdown of things that anti-whites otherwise need to run, because unlike the typical parasite in an animal's body that will kill the animal because it can't think, the disease can't think to know that it doesn't want to kill the organism so that the organism will persist and therefore the parasite will persist. In society, they do see when things begin to break down, and they will endeavor to keep things going, to stay on top of that society. And so just some more thoughts to add to the conversation.
Well, I would add, though, with that when you get runaway individualism, you actually can get people acting against their interests, because you can get conflicting evolutionary instincts. Now, one instinct that is very strong, particularly among people who are individualists, is basically Machiavellianism, is a desire for power. And if there's nothing in place to stop people virtue signaling and outdoing each other on their virtue signaling about the importance of equality and the importance of or indeed of religious belief and how committed they are to the group, then eventually you get something like the Gnostic movements. And Paul Goldfried has argued that multiculturalism is really a Gnostic heresy. Where they argue that, well, the world is an evil place, and we shouldn't have children, and it's morally bad to have children because you're bringing more children into this fallen evil world that was created by the satanic demiurge, and so therefore you become more powerful in the group if you don't have children, because you're therefore more moral, and you advocate that more firmly. So your desire for power, that strong instinct for power, actually becomes maladaptive in those circumstances because you don't breed. And that's what we have with multiculturalism. We have a movement that is literally advocating not just that white people shouldn't have children. They go beyond that. You talk about everything being anti-white. It's more than anti-white. It's anti-human. They go further than that. They want to put the rights of animals above the rights of humans. So there are strands within the left that are like that. That it's humanity. Worse, whites are worse than blacks, fine, but humans are worse than animals. And I don't know.
I've got to say, Ed, I do prefer some animals though to some humans. There are some humans that I would put lower on the scale than certain animals.
Well, obviously, yes, animals are much more. Most animals are far more pleasant and logical and reasonable than woke people. Because woke people are mutants that are mutated to want the destruction of their own species. Whereas you don't get
that baby bird last year, and it lived in my downstairs toilet for a couple of weeks. I'd much rather share my home with that baby blackbird than I would a Somalian asylum seeker, for instance.
And I would much rather share my home with a Somalian asylum seeker than I would with an upper middle class, privately educated left-wing person. So because at least that Somali and I would see eye to eye on certain things. We would understand the importance of group, the importance of ethnicity, the importance of life, the importance of having families, the importance of normal adaptive values, whereas the woke person wouldn't. So yeah, I see. I can completely sympathize with you on that front. You're dealing with these basically zombies. That's how I see them. They're people. That's why I think zombie films are so popular these days, because there was research on this that found that people who watch horror films are more able to deal with unpleasant situations in real life than people that don't. because horror films inure you against fear in dangerous situations because you're experiencing them in some way, and they kind of show you techniques how to deal with them. So horror films are a little bit like fairy tales in much the same way. What do fairy tales do? They warn kids against danger, and they're more likely to absorb that information if it's presented to them with imaginative, surreal elements. And there's been research on that, and so that's why the fairy tales are therefore passed down over time, and avoid dark forests, avoid strangers, that sort of thing. And so horror movies would seem to offer that kind of function. So it's inuring you against the dangerous thing, and it's showing you what to do to survive it. I was watching Train to, is it Busan or Busan the other day, this Korean horror movie, and I thought, bloody hell, if that happened in Britain, we'd be in trouble, because of course we have these electric rails, whereas everywhere else it's overhead cables. So it'd be much more dangerous because there'd be a live wire escaping from a zombie-filled train. But so the way I would see it, though, is that the zombie movies might be increasingly popular because we are aware that we now live in a society where most people are zombies, where most people are. What do zombies do? They literally eat your brains and want to destroy their own people. That's what zombies do. And what do the woke do? The woke are eating your brains in the sense that they employ this illogical, insane ideology that makes no sense at all and is totally inconsistent, so that race is a social construct but also exists depending on what they feel like. And also they are destroying their own people. And there are a small band of brothers who are resistant to this in the zombie movies and manage to escape. But I think we realise that's what we are. And most people get infected. The vast majority of people either are the original zombies, or they get infected with wokeness and they dysphoria, and they don't have children, and they become materialistic, and they don't pass on their genes. And there's a small number of people who are genetically able to not be infected, which is basically congenitally right-wing religious people, and also low IQ people. And those people will survive, but then they'll survive to the new zombie apocalypse, which will be low IQ people. But I would see us as living through a zombie apocalypse. I think it's a perfectly reasonable metaphor. A wocalypse. Yes.
I was just going to say, I definitely push back on this being anti-human, because non-white people are, whenever they're harmed, it's only collateral damage throughout the West. They are encouraged, at least in the United States, perhaps not in the UK. They are encouraged to have gigantic families. They're depicted in media with large families and very happy. They're paid the more children that they have. White people who are anti-white would never think in a million years of even suggesting that to a non-white person not to have children, not to celebrate their culture, not to celebrate their people, not to have more of their people. Our governments bring in non-white people as rapidly as they possibly can. So I see this as purely anti-white by anti-white oligarchs. And I think the evidence clearly shows that as well. It is to the harm of Western kind that this is taking place, not to the harm of.
That's true. No, I think you're right. It is to the harm of Western kind. But if you look at what happens to them when they come in, these non-whites, to Western countries, then their birth rate after one generation dramatically declines. And that is, I suspect, because they are themselves subject to the zombie apocalypse. They are themselves subject to an evolutionary mismatch. They are themselves subject to materialism and dysphoria and whatever. And so it does affect them as well.
Collateral
and
damage.
All I'm saying is that although the whites will not, will virtue signal about not having children, and you do get this, that they will virtue signal about not having children. Now, you could see that's in part because they have a suicidal attitude towards their own group, which they probably do. But I also think that it does extend to having a suicidal attitude towards their own species. And they want to take us back. I mean, these Extinction Rebellion people, they want to take us back to a sort of dark age, basically. If the kind of policies which they want were instituted, there'd be a collapse of 90%. Although, to be fair, that collapse would happen anyway if we went to Darwinian conditions again now. But,
and again, with the Extinction Rebellion people, where are they pushing that? They're not pushing that in Nambia. They're pushing that in the UK. They're pushing that in the US. They're pushing that where white people are. And when it comes to the individualism that is plaguing us, perhaps there's a genetic factor, but certainly there is an ideology of rapid rabid individualism, and that deteriorating the system or breaking down the system. It's true that there will be individuals, if you can imagine a business for a second, for a moment here, that there would be a business manager or an assistant, and they are all rabid individualists, and they are doing things that harm the business. The owners, however, the anti-white oligarchs, the people with the real power, the real money at the very top, they're not going to allow the restaurant to go under in a way that will undermine their power. So I don't know what that would necessarily look like if they wanted to preserve an environment, a nation, a civilization in a way that will keep them entrenched in power and in power vis-a-vis other holders of power around the world. But they won't allow civilization to crumble to the point of like Mad Max, simply because their managers they get the behavior out of their employees, just as we do in business. They get the behavior out of their employees that they want, or they get new employees, and so they will preserve whatever civilization would need to look like for them to maintain their power vis-a-vis the other holders of power around planet Earth. So I agree that at the level of the restaurateur, the gourmand, and the waiter, and perhaps the manager, that these individuals could be rabidly individualistic, and they could harm the restaurant by doing whatever they would like to do, maybe not paying their bill, maybe going to the kitchen to get the food they want rather than wait, this sort of thing. But ultimately, if the restaurant became destructive for the power wielded by the restaurant owner, he or she would step in and correct that ship to work in a way that would nonetheless serve him or her, as I say, vis-a-vis the other holders of power. In this metaphor would be the other restaurant owner down the street.
I don't think that necessarily entirely follows, because if they are obsessed with their own individual power, then they can keep going and keep going and keep going to the detriment of society. And by the time it's realized what they've done to society and it damages them, it would be too late. As a society is a complex organism, you get people that are obsessed with power. They get into positions of power. They push for more power. All they're concerned with is their own individual power. And as long as they can protect themselves from any negative consequences that might bring about, then they'll be perfectly happy to keep going and make the society worse and worse, until, you're right, eventually there would be some sort of pushback. So if they were cunning enough, then they'd have to have other things. They'd have to be obsessed with power and have a high level of intelligence as well, and be interested in sort of other factors. But I'm saying that someone that was purely individualistic would presumably just keep going, to keep promoting their own individual interests at every point until they were surrounded by chaos. I mean, you see this in wars, that a country is taken over by an individualistic person, and he just takes it to the destruction, like Robert Mugabe or someone like that. And this brings about his own removal because of his own obsession with his own power, his failure to take into account anything else.
Precisely. And who's removing them? If you were the owner of the restaurant and you had a rabid individualistic manager that was harming the restaurant, you, of course, I mean, unless you are positing that the people at the very top, the people with the true power, the people who know what's really going on, unless you're positing that they are afflicted with the same sort of blinkers and that they don't really know what's going on in the world, the restaurant owner in the example here would be aware of what's really going on in the world. And if you had an employee, a manager that was power hungry and harming the restaurant, you would eventually, as you just pointed out, eventually the individual would be removed. The people removing the individual would be those with the real power behind the scenes. Now, again, like I said, you're pointing out like the breakdown of civilization. Whatever that looks like, it would have to be something that would keep those who are truly in power. They would not allow it to break down in a way. So, for example,
how could they stop it from breaking down?
The same way they would
stop it.
Well, the same way they would stop. The same way they have engendered this scenario right now. They hire people who implement strategies and policies that are benefiting and increasing their power as individual power holders. And so, at some point where it became detrimental, they would these people would be removed, as you point out, and other people would be hired, and the expectations would be projected to them about what's now going to take place and this place of business. And any deviation from that will result in your dismissal from the position. And that then would work its way down through the ranks of the business. And this,
I don't think this restaurant comparison is helpful, because a restaurant is quite a simple thing to run. We're talking about a complex society. But how if people are becoming... Sorry?
I said it's scalable. It's just human. It's just human behavior.
It's more involved. The societies do collapse, and so if your metaphor is correct, they would never. And so do restaurants. So they would never do so. They would always make the correct decisions, and they would. But what if they made the wrong decisions? And what if they miscalculated?
Because it's not taking place in a laboratory. There are external pressures. Now we have, in previous times, you have societies where the external pressures were far more numerous than they are today. The holders of power hold far more power today than at any point in human history. So there are fewer of these individuals left to have to compete that could, by way of external power, reduce the civilization to pieces. If anything, the external powers now are so few and so powerful that they would worm their way in. As China right now is worming its way into many of the Western countries and beginning to take control of many of its centers of power. And they would simply supplant the power holders that were there before. It wouldn't be in China's interest. If China could take over the United States, for example, by way of numerous subversive means, it would not be in China's interest to reduce the United States to crumbling ash of dystopian hell, because China would be empowered by a very powerful.
I'm not saying that they want to reduce any country to a crumbling ash of dystopian hell. I'm saying that they are engaged. They are engaging. There is a process occurring where something like that is going to happen, because you get a large. They are pushing a situation where so many people will be in such a strong evolutionary mismatch that they will either not breed, and the only people that breed are those who are very right-wing and very conservative. That's the data. Those are the people that disproportionately breed, which means that over a generation, you will start to see a change in the nature of society, and you'll see this upward percolation upwards into positions of power of basically intelligent right-wing people. And it's almost inevitable that it happens just by demographics. So that's the first thing, that they can't do much about it. That there will be a change in the nature of the people and what they're prepared to tolerate, and what evokes riots and what evokes problems more quickly. So that's the first difference. And so those people will gather others around them who will do their bidding. Secondly, the society is collapsing in trust. We know that. So it's much more difficult to control people and to indoctrinate people if society is collapsing in trust and sort of splitting apart into smaller polities. So there's not a lot that's something that they have to try to control. And thirdly, people are just getting stupider, and thus they are more inclined to make bad decisions, and to misunderstand things, and to just balls up. And so therefore they become more difficult to control. That's why China's so dangerous once it has this kind of technology, because they have an average IQ of 107. They're very, very intelligent, and therefore it's more complicated than that in countries like Britain or America. And also that country's more diverse. So I'm saying that it's the idea that these are these super clever evil genius Dr. Robotnik types that can control us all, and will always be able to do so unless some sort of Sonic the Hedgehog is sent in. It doesn't fit with the data, and it doesn't fit with previous experience. You're getting is something very similar to what you had at the end of Rome, which is the rise of these highly individualistic and powerful people who take charge and are highly individualistic. But they eventually you start to get riots. And they can't keep food on. They can't keep the lights on. I mean, they can't keep civilization going, and that's when you start to get a reaction against them.
you're talking about both natural and artificial selection, if I could take it out of biology for a moment. And when you have this, you're talking about these societies where you mentioned Rome there, they didn't have, of course, the ability to know what every single citizen was thinking and to be able to make decisions prior to those, or based on those thoughts, based on those likes, based on those dislikes. I would submit that if the anti-white oligarchs who run the Federal Reserve, who print the money in the United States, who print the money in the UK, if they had become themselves poisoned or diseased with these crazy ideas, which I don't think they have. I don't think they're fooled by the ideas that all of us throughout the rest of the ranks of our civilization in the West have been fooled by and diseased by. If they have, then healthier external powers, who now, when Rome, they didn't have the ability to do this, but if they did, this would have changed the outcome of Rome's collapse. They will come in and they will simply supplant with the least amount of disruption possible. And even if the population ends up, as you say, even if you're 100% correct there, and you might be, that you end up with healthier people reproducing, they can still, from the position of authority, select for those who are going to be submissive, who are going to work for them, who are going to carry their will. And this is really how these institutions were dominated across the West. This idea that it percolated up.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry. Okay, I see. We're talking about something slightly different. I see what you mean. Yeah. So I would certainly concur that you're with these kinds of people. We're talking about Vicar of Bray types. We're talking about Marquis of Winchester types. These are people that they just want power. They have no principles at all. Mm-hmm. And so if the wind changes, you're going to get, and you did get this, you're going to get people that would be active for the Nazi Party in East Germany, and then just as active for the communist GDR. And those people will change their minds and may even genuinely believe it, because through effortful control, it kind of makes sense to force yourself to believe the current ideology, and thus will always try to stay in positions of power. That I agree with you. Yeah, and I think that a lot of these people, these oligarchs, I think that's exactly what they're like. So if we were living in a society that was very influenced by group-oriented values, like in Victorian times, they would be virtue signaling about that, and they were about how patriotic they were, about the importance of the nation, about all that. It's exactly what the Henry Ford, someone like that. That's exactly what they'd be going on and on about it. And then now that it's changed, and if you want power and money, you have to pretend to signal the new ideology. Well, that's what you do. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Those people aren't going to go away, and they're going to be cunning and clever and try and keep hold of resources. I agree with you. That's what I entirely concur.
So, are we saying that there is going to be a collapse, or there isn't going to be a collapse?
I think there'll be a collapse, but you're going to get certain very devious, Machiavellian, individualistic people that will always manage to find ways to survive, and protect themselves from the as much as they can from it. And to the extent that they think that it's going to harm them, they will do all they can to try to stop it. I think that's what No White Guilt is saying. They will do all they can to try and stop it to the extent that it will harm them. But they won't try and bring it about. But they're not idiots. But there is a degree to which there are things they can't do about it.